In recent days, Taiwan has found itself navigating a complex diplomatic landscape following comments made by former U.S. President Donald Trump regarding trade and unification. During a press conference on May 12, Trump suggested that the opening of trade relations with China could lead to fantastic outcomes not only for the U.S. and China but also for peace and unification. This remark, while focused on trade, raised alarm bells in Taiwan, prompting officials to clarify that there has been no shift in U.S. policy towards the island. Taiwan's presidential office quickly moved to reassure its citizens that Washington's commitment to the island remains strong and unchanged, amid fears that Trump's comments could signal a softening of U.S. support. The U.S. State Department reiterated that the remarks were made in the context of U.S. China trade relations and did not pertain to Taiwan. This clarification is crucial as Taiwan's security and political status have long been points of contention in U.S. China relations. The reactions to Trump's statement reveal underlying tensions in Taiwan's political landscape. Government and diplomatic circles in Taiwan expressed concern that such comments could be interpreted as a tacit endorsement of China's stance on unification, a sensitive issue given the island's history of strained relations with the mainland. This apprehension underscores the delicate balance Taiwan must maintain in an era of heightened competition between the United States and China. Experts note that while the temporary rollback of tariffs between the U.S. and China might create a facade of improved relations, it does little to diminish the deep-seated suspicions both nations harbor towards each other. Jonathan Chin, a policy expert at the Brookings Institution, remarked that Beijing is likely viewing the tariff pause as a tactical retreat by the U.S. rather than a genuine shift in its approach to China. His perspective highlights the complexities of U.S.-China diplomacy, where economic negotiations often intertwine with broader geopolitical strategies. China's aggressive posturing in the Asia-Pacific region, particularly toward Taiwan, adds another layer of complexity. The Chinese government has been vocal about its territorial claims, having recently conducted military exercises around Taiwan which were interpreted as a show of force. This military activity is part of a larger pattern of asserting territorial claims in the South China Sea and other disputed areas. Even as China seeks to present itself as a cooperative player on the economic front. As Taiwan braces for potential fallout from these developments, its leaders are keenly aware of the need to maintain strong ties with the United States, which has been a vital ally in its defense strategy. The ongoing dialogue between Washington and Taipei remains pivotal, especially as Taiwan continues to face increasing pressure from Beijing. In conclusion, the recent comments from Trump have reignited fears in Taiwan regarding its relationship with the U.S. and the implications for its sovereignty. As the international community watches closely, the future of U.S.-Taiwan relations will likely hinge on how effectively both sides can navigate the tumultuous waters of U.S.-China relations and ensure that Taiwan's voice remains heard amidst the competing interests of these two major powers. The coming months will be critical in determining not only the trajectory of trade relations but also the broader implications for regional stability in East Asia. As the global economy grapples with ongoing uncertainty and volatility, recent developments in U.S.-China trade relations have provided a glimmer of hope for businesses on both sides of the Pacific. Following a weekend of negotiations in Switzerland, representatives from the United States and China announced a temporary pause on tariffs that have fueled tensions between the world's two largest economies. The U.S. has agreed to reduce its tariffs on Chinese goods to 30% from a staggering 145%, while China will lower its tariffs to 10% from 125%. This development has sent stock markets soaring and sparked optimism among investors, but it also raises critical questions about the long-term implications of this trade truce. In the wake of the announcement, U.S. businesses are scrambling to import goods that had been stalled due to the punitive tariffs. Diane Swunk, the chief economist at KPMG US, likened the situation to a broken stoplight at a busy intersection, describing the uncertainty that continues to loom over the economy. Everyone all of a sudden slows down to a crawl to try to creep across the stoplight, not knowing which person's supposed to go next, she explained. This analogy underscores a broader concern that while trade may resume, The underlying instability caused by fluctuating tariffs could lead to significant disruptions in supply chains and consumer markets. The immediate effect of the tariff reduction has been a surge in stock prices, with the S&P 500 climbing nearly 3.3% and the tech-heavy Nasdaq Composite rising by 4.3%. This rally is particularly pronounced in sectors heavily impacted by trade tensions such as technology and automotive manufacturing. For instance, stocks of companies like Nvidia, Amazon, and Apple saw considerable gains as investors celebrated the potential for a reduction in trade-related costs. However, the relief may be short-lived. Analysts warn that while the pause offers temporary reprieve, it does not eliminate the risk of future escalations. Despite the optimism surrounding the trade deal, economists are cautious about the implications of this temporary arrangement. Swank highlighted that the market may still experience stagflation, a scenario where higher prices coexist with slower economic growth and rising unemployment. This concern is compounded by the fact that the tariffs had already created significant pressure on small businesses, many of which remain wary of the economic landscape. Heidi Krieber-Rediker, a senior fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations, pointed out that while the recent tariff adjustments provide some relief, small businesses that import goods from China are still facing considerable challenges. This is still a huge nightmare to navigate, she stated. Furthermore, the uncertainty surrounding tariff negotiations extends beyond just U.S. China relations. The Trump administration's recent trade agreements with other countries such as the UK reflect a broader strategy aimed at reshaping international trade dynamics. However, experts argue that establishing long-term agreements will require more than just temporary pauses in tariff hikes. The complexities of global trade mean that negotiations can take years, and the current piecemeal approach may create further instability. Looking ahead, the coming months will be critical for the global economy as countries assess the impact of these trade agreements. With U.S. tariffs still looming over several sectors, including auto manufacturing, businesses will need to remain agile and responsive to the changing landscape. As Swank noted, these sort of stop-go programs are the things that can make for very big policy mistakes. The hope, however, is that this latest trade truce will pave the way for more comprehensive agreements that foster a more stable and predictable economic environment. In conclusion, while the recent U.S. China tariff pause represents a significant step toward easing trade tensions, the road ahead remains fraught with challenges. As businesses navigate this uncertain terrain, the focus will likely shift towards the efficacy of these temporary measures and their long-term impact on the global economy. As negotiations continue, stakeholders will be keenly watching for signs of a more permanent resolution that could ultimately redefine the future of international trade. In an intricate dance of diplomacy and rivalry, the relationship between the United States and China continues to evolve, marked by both cooperation and contention. As recent developments suggest a temporary easing of trade tensions, the broader geopolitical landscape remains fraught with challenges. Beijing is poised to navigate this complex terrain with a dual strategy, seeking economic partnerships while maintaining a firm stance on its territorial claims. Following months of escalating tariffs that strained trade ties, both nations agreed to a tariff truce, a move that many hope could pave the way for a high-stakes summit between President Trump and Chinese leader Xi Jinping. However, experts caution that this pause in trade hostilities does not signal a fundamental shift in U.S. China relations. Jonathan Chin, a foreign policy scholar at the Brookings Institution, notes, "I think it validates Beijing's view that it was correct to take a dark view of U.S. intentions." This sentiment is echoed in Beijing's recent diplomatic overtures as Xi Jinping attempts to position China as a stable partner in Asia, actively engaging with countries like Vietnam, Cambodia, and Malaysia. However, this charm offensive is coupled with assertive military posturing, particularly in regions that Beijing considers strategically vital. On the same day that the tariff agreement was announced, Chinese authorities issued a national security white paper warning of increasing threats from external forces, a term they often use to reference the U.S. and its allies. The complexities of regional security are underscored by ongoing territorial disputes. In the East China Sea, tensions flared when a Chinese Coast Guard helicopter entered airspace near disputed islands claimed by Japan, while in the South China Sea, China's actions on Sandy Cay, also claimed by the Philippines, escalated fears of potential conflict. Julian Gewertz, a former U.S. official on China policy, highlights that China's leaders believe this is a moment to set advantageous terms with their neighbors. As the U.S. solidifies its military alliances in the Indo-Pacific, the challenges for China intensify. Ely Ratner, a key figure in defense policy, emphasizes that despite the tariff negotiations, the defense relationship among the U.S. and its Asian allies remains robust. Most of America's allies view China as their primary national security threat, Ratner states, signaling a critical divide that may affect future diplomatic efforts. The military aspect of this rivalry is also intensifying, as evidenced by the U.S. unveiling details of its sixth-generation fighter jet, the F-47, which is poised to enhance air combat capabilities significantly. This development comes as China advances its own sixth-generation fighters, the Chengdu J-36 and Shenyang J-50, raising the stakes in an already competitive military landscape. General David Alvin of the U.S. Air Force notes that these developments are crucial for operations across the Indo-Pacific region, highlighting the escalating arms race. Despite these tactical developments, mutual distrust continues to plague U.S.-China relations. Chinese scholars like Xindingli predict that while short-term trade improvements could emerge, the underlying issues are too significant for a lasting resolution. We have too many points of disagreement, Chen cautions, suggesting that tensions may flare again after any temporary easing. As the world watches this evolving narrative, the implications of U.S.-China relations extend far beyond tariffs and military might. The balance of power in Asia hangs in the balance, with both nations poised to assert their influence in a rapidly changing global landscape. Looking ahead, the strategies adopted by both sides will not only shape their bilateral relationship but also define the geopolitical dynamics in the Asia-Pacific region for years to come.